Welcome to MiceTech Talk with the technical information scientists of the Jackson Laboratory. My name is Caitlin, and my job as a technical information scientist is to serve the research community by answering all of your mouse-related questions.
And I'm Sarah. MiceTech Talk is a way for us to connect with the research community and answer some of your mouse-related questions live.
So for those of you who are watching live, you can use the comments section of this video and tell us where you're viewing from. We always love to hear from you. And if you have any related questions to today's topic, and we'll try to answer those live today. So hopefully you're ready with your questions because it's time for MiceTech Talk. So today, let's talk new data on old mice.
There's definitely a lot of interest right now moving beyond the biology of young mice. We know old mice are different. Their biology is different from young mice, and they may have different reactions in both studies or in therapeutic treatments. Sometimes young mice may not be appropriate for your research. You really need to study older mice for different areas of research. So today we want to talk about some of the considerations for using old mice.
So why don't we start off with the topic of talking about when mice are old? So I know we have like 7 years of dog years are equal to people 1 person years. How does that translate from mice to humans?
It's a fantastic question because it really depends on what you mean by old. So we think of kind of the mature adult stage in mice to be about 3 to 6 months. This is basically after reaching sexual maturity, but before you really start seeing any changes in senescence. 6 months is about the upper edge because that's when we really start to see reproductive changes, which you'll see like decline in litter sizes, for example. So you can kind of think of this in human terms as being equivalent of a human in their kind of low 20s to mid to early 30s. Middle age is when we start to see some changes. So some biomarkers of aging is going to start changing. You're going to start seeing some decline. So like reproductively, they're going to start seeing decline in that regard. For mice, this is really kind of in that 10 to 14 month range. So, we've seen declines in the reproductive markers, but not all biomarkers are changing. So some biomarkers still look the same as the young mice. This is kind of equivalent to humans in their upper 30s to kind of late 40s. And then around 18 months is where you start to reach a stage where most biomarkers of aging are going to be changing. This is kind of when we consider mice to be old. And that's when you're really looking at kind of humans in their late 50s and up.
So does that mean that people that want to study aging, does that mean that they should just use 18-month-old mice?
It really depends on what we're looking at. So you really need to know the biomarker that you're particularly interested in. So if you're looking at a biomarker that starts changing in that 10 to 14 month range, you might want to start earlier than that. So you don't necessarily want to start right at the point where your biomarker is changing because then you can't really see any changes to that biomarker changing. So for example, if you want to study if you have a therapeutic that you think affects breeding performance, you want to start earlier than when you think breeding performance is going to decline. So that way you can really see before it declines and then after. So you kind of get that range. So it depends on the particular biomarker that you're looking at. So having kind of a good understanding of the biomarker that you're most interested in is really the key. How about if we look at an example? Caitlin, I know that you've been looking at some new data right now with some aged metabolic models. Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So my area of expertise is in metabolics, and we just wrapped up some studies looking at Nash. And so we have aged out some of our C57 black 6J mice to about 56 weeks of age. And then we actually placed them on an amylin diet. So for those of you who don't know what an amylin diet is, that's about 40% kilocalories from fat, about 20% from fructose, and 2% cholesterol. And so anyway, we put these aged mice onto this diet, and then we started to follow some of their biomarkers at every 4 weeks. And as early as 4 weeks, we started to see some elevations that were significant in liver function. We didn't see any major changes in glucose, which is kind of what you would expect, but we did see some significant increases in cholesterol. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you started with 56 weeks, which is, remind me how many months is that? It's like
12 and a half.
12 and a half months. Okay. And then you went out for another, like, almost a full year. Is that kind of, so you
So
were,
yeah, so we followed them for an additional about 6 months. Um, so
okay,
so that took them out to about 24 months of age. So we wanted
okay.
to make sure we really captured that. Um,
A whole range of
right,
time. Yeah.
right. So we wanted to start following them before they were considered, very old.
Hmm.
And it really helped us to model the disease progression of NASH. So the liver, becomes diseased over time, and NASH progresses as mice age. And so it was really great to be able to follow them for that time period.
I think that's a great example of where you need to know the biomarkers that you're looking at. So in your case, you were looking at biomarkers of liver disease and knowing kind of when you expected them to start changing. That gave you your time frame that you needed to really assess.
Right.
So tell me a little bit more about some of the, what are the key benefits for this model? Why would someone use this model over another model?
Yeah, so we know one of the major risk factors in really any metabolic related disease is age. Aging leads to more experience with different environmental factors, such as fatty foods, alcohol, drugs, if there's any sort of environmental toxins. Those are going to build up and damage the liver over time. And so that's really one of the key benefits here, is that these mice are already aged, and we can sort of account for that age risk factor. We also see that this NASH liver histopathology tends to develop pretty rapidly in these mice. So once we place these mice on amylin diet for about 6 weeks, they look as if they look very similar to mice that were placed on amylin diet at 6 weeks and then continued on diet for an additional 20 weeks. So it saves you time and money, as far as housing your mice, how long you have to keep them on the diet.
So if you were to start with younger mice, you would have to keep them on the diet longer to get to the same point as you put the old mice on for a shorter period of time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, so it speeds up the process a little bit for you. And again, you're starting with already older mice. That's interesting.
Absolutely. And the other really great thing about this model is that females also show the disease. So in a lot of other
Hmm.
NASH models, females, don't show the NASH phenotype, whereas the females in this particular model show a very similar phenotype to males.
Interesting. Yeah, because most of my familiarity is with the kind of the diet-induced models, which I know have a different response rate in females versus males. So this is interesting. That's really cool.
Right.
And that's some fun new data that's been collected over the last more recently.
Right. And there's actually one final benefit that I would like to point out too, is that at JAX, we have these mice aged out from starting at 25 weeks all the way up to, I believe, 90 weeks now. So they're just
Yeah.
our regular C57 black 6J mice. So we've got them starting at 3 weeks all the way out to 90 weeks. Um, so there's no need to
So
age the mice in your own facility.
yeah, that definitely saves a lot of time.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
So one thing I do want to mention about another consideration you want to think about with aged mice is your assay. So there's always, with different, as mice age, they have certain characteristics that are going to change that may affect the assay that you're actually looking to use. So one example is C57 black 6 strains all have a mutation in the CDH23 gene. This relates in an age, or this results in an age-related hearing loss. So if you have a behavioral study that requires audio cues that you may have used at younger ages, if you were to move to aged mice, it may not work, or you may get confounding results because the mice have this age-related hearing loss that's going to affect their ability to perform in those studies. So that's definitely something you still want to consider. You want to make sure that you're familiar with the particular assay that you're going to use, and you probably want to try it in an aged population before you run your study to make sure that you know how an aged mouse is going to relate to that particular assay. There's another one that I read about. This was an interesting test to assess fine motor skills. So it involves putting actually a little small sticker on the back of the mouse, and then they reach over and they grab it off. And you record the time it takes for them to grab it, and that gives you some assessment of their fine motor skills to be able to do that. But one characteristic of older mice, particularly female mice, is they often develop alopecia, or they barber themselves as they get older, and more mice will have alopecia or barbering during the aging process. And so that alopecia could potentially affect that study results. That could be confounding and may not be telling you what you think it's telling you. So you always want to think about not just what biomarker you're studying, but also what assay you're going to use to assess that biomarker. So that's kind of a couple of the major considerations. So let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
I did see that we had one come in via email asking about estrogen levels and if they decline in female mice. So they asked specifically about 12-month-old female mice. I figured you might have a better idea on that since...
Yeah, I don't have any off the top of my head. I can't think of the specifics, but certainly that's actually a great example of a question that you should come to MiceTech Talk, because what I can do is look through some of the resources. So there's a couple of resources actually we have linked either at the top or the bottom, depending on whether you're looking at LinkedIn or YouTube. So one is a link for aging studies that have been done or being done, not just by JACS, but other aging kind of organizations across the US and across the world. So there may be some information available there. In some cases, you may be able to find information on our aged B6, and again, that link is up or down. Our aged B6 study or strain data sheet, there are some references listed in that strain data sheet, so you can look through that and see if anyone has discussed specifically estrogen levels. If you've looked through all that data and you still can't find the answer to your question, definitely reach out. MiceTech@jax.org is our technical information email. It's a great way to reach us. And so if you're having trouble finding some of those specific details about aged mice, reach out to us, and I'll do my best to dig into the data that I can find as well.
Great. Thanks for highlighting those resources that we have. So we have another question that just came in. What should you do if you don't know when your biomarker changes, or even if it changes?
It's a really great question. You want to start with what you can find in the literature. See what other people have done to assess that particular biomarker. Every biomarker is different. They're all going to change at different time points. Some biomarkers might change earlier during what we call the middle age period. Some might not change till later. So you really want to know what your biomarker change is doing. If you can't find it in the literature, or if it's something that no one's really assessed to the level that you need, you may want to consider doing a small pilot study in your facility. And this is great for two reasons. One, it gives you the direct data that you need for your study, but also it's really good to also make sure that the biomarker, even if you were to find some literature results, it's always good to assess what the biomarker is doing in your own facility. For some biomarkers, there can be environmental effects. So things like the microbiome of your facility may affect how a potential biomarker might change in your mice. So doing that small pilot before you do a really long aging study is really great, because the last thing you want to do is age your mice out to 2 years and then find out that, oh, you really needed to start 6 months earlier and to get what you needed. So doing that preliminary study to get the data you need for your study is going to save you time in the long run.
Right, and just to sort of tack onto that, especially if you're looking at metabolics in aged mice, you really need to make sure that the mice are habituated to your facility before you start your experiments, especially if they've been on diet, let's say at JACS, and then we ship you mice. The shipping causes stress and they quit eating, and sometimes they can lose their phenotype until you put them back on that diet.
Yeah, so it's really good to make sure that you get everything set up ahead of time, so that way you don't lose time or money or effort.
Yep. One final quick question, and Sarah, you might know the answer to this, you might not, but do female mice reach menopause, and if so, at what age approximately?
Reproductively, they start declining right after that 6 month time frame, but I don't know exactly if there's a specific time when they're expected to reach menopause or what the biomarkers of menopause might be in mice. Again, that's a great question to send to MiceTech, because that way I can really dig into it and find that specific data that will be helpful for your research needs.
Right. I was just going to suggest too that, we start to retire our breeders at around 6 months of age, and that's probably due to a decrease in their reproductive abilities.
Yeah, and it depends on what if you just want to know when breeding is going to cease, or if you want to look at specific, like the question earlier from estrogen levels, things like that. There may be specific changes that occur earlier or later, but may occur before menopause or after menopause, or what mouse menopause might look like. So again, definitely reach out and contact MiceTech at jax.org, so that way we can answer your question.
All right, well, I think that's all we have time for today. Our next MiceTech talk is called Let's Talk Metabolism and Temperature, and that's going to be on Tuesday, February the 16th. So we look forward to seeing you on LinkedIn and YouTube. And this is Caitlin saying stay safe, stay healthy, and stay excited about research.